everyone, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and welcome to the 2022 ChemKnits Chanukah special. Every night of Chanukah this year, and past years, I will be releasing a new yarn dyeing video at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time, so that way we can all celebrate Chanukah together. So please make sure that you're subscribed and have your notifications turned on so you don't miss any of the video premieres. Tonight, I am taking inspiration from a color I created as part of the 2022 Spring Mini Skein mini-series. I did some triad color mixing exercise with three primary colors from Dharma, cyan, magenta, and yellow. And there was this gorgeous teal near the center of the triangle. And I knew that I wanted to create this color, but with a slightly different take, by layering the colors one at a time. So we wouldn't get even color across it, but we'd get this layered tonal effect where we'd have multiple different colors and hues because of the uneven tonal layers that we're layering together. And I'm really excited to see how this might turn out. My plan was to do a cold process of these colors. Even though it was a summer day and therefore very hot outside, in general, the plan was to apply each layer of color, let it strike slowly, do the next layer and the next layer, and then we'll steam set everything at the end. And now let's go start talking about the math as I figure out how much dye I'm gonna need to create this color at a total depth of shade of 1% or 1 gram of dye per 100 grams of yarn, with the ratios of 2 parts blue, 1 part yellow, and 1 part pink. The color that we dyed was a 1% depth of shade, which means that there was the equivalent of 1 gram of dye per 100 grams of yarn total. But the ratio, and if we break down the depth of shade of each of the individual colors, is 0.5% blue, 0.25% yellow, and 0.25% pink. And these ratios can help us calculate how much of each individual color that we need to dye 1,350 grams of yarn. To calculate the number of grams of dye that we will need, we can look at our total grams of yarn multiplied by our depth of shade, which is the grams of dye per 100 grams of yarn. So in this case, we have the 1,350 grams of yarn. And for example, in the case of the blue, we have 0.5 grams of dye per 100 grams of yarn. Feel free to double check my math, but this means that we are going to need 6.75 grams of the Caribbean blue dye, 3.38 grams of yellow, and pink. Now, this is a recipe that we could play with in a couple different ways. We could make 1% stock solutions of each of the colors, and if we had a 1% stock solution, we would need 675 milliliters of a 1% stock solution, say for the Caribbean blue, and then half that for each of the other colors. But since we're going to be doing one round of dyeing in a 5-gallon bucket, we can also just weigh out the amount of dye that we need for each of these colors. And especially since we're dealing with the order of grams versus fractions of grams here, there is more precision measuring out the total number of grams than there might be if I was dyeing only 100 grams of yarn, and so then we were measuring out 1/2 gram and 1/4 gram of the colors. Of course, you are more than welcome to play around with this in many different ways, but today I am going to be measuring out the total number of grams that we need. I put on my deluxe rubber respirator with P100 filters, safety glasses, and gloves, and started weighing out the dye that we would need for today. Once I measured out the appropriate amount of dye, I started dissolving it in hot tap water in a non-specific volume. Since we're going to use all of the dye for each of these colors at this proportion, the volume of water we dissolve it in is not very important here today. The important thing is that we get the dye as dissolved as possible. Now, for the Caribbean blue, I decided to break it up and dissolve a little bit of the dye at a time because I knew that that would be a little bit easier than trying to deal with the larger volume of powder all at once. I'm glad I remembered that Caribbean blue clumps, doing it in little batches at a time was a lot easier because then I didn't end up with a ginormous ball of dye. Some colors will dissolve pretty easily, others don't. Maybe boiling water would have helped more with the Caribbean blue, but now we can go and start dyeing our yarn, which I will be doing all of that outside. And because Caribbean blue is the most potent color that we have going on here today, and because I know it takes long time to absorb to yarn, we're gonna do that last. So I think the order we're gonna do is yellow, then pink, then blue. The yarn we're dyeing today are 10-gram mini skeins of Wool to Dye Force Platinum Sock and Platinum DK. This yarn is 75% superwash merino, 25% nylon. I pre-soaked all of the yarn overnight in just some plain tap water. And now I am going to remove it from the dye bath, trying to squeeze out not like as much water as I can, but a reasonable amount of water because we're gonna want the yarn to soak up as much dye as possible. For this first layer of color, which we're gonna be doing with the yellow, we're gonna start with no acids. So that way we can distribute the yellow dye as far as we can on the yarn. Now I'm gonna add all of the dye, all of the yellow dye here, and we are gonna want to stir things up. I think I see a hint of a tiny bit of powder at the bottom of this container, and so I'm just trying to scrape that up. Okay. And I have a pair of tongs here that I can use to stir the color into the bucket. Now, the yarn is going to be fairly crowded in here, which means that we will get tonal variation. So we're not going to end up with that final color that we're aiming for all over the yarn. We might have, some skeins might have some hints of yellow left, others hints of pink, and things like that. But I'm now going to gather all of the yarn by the zip ties. And we are going to start adding it in. And so I'm dipping it in, letting it go beneath the surface. Hopefully we'll be able to fit all the colors in. But now I also need to sort of, actually it looks like this is penetrating pretty well on all the colors. I'm opening it up to move aside to try to get fairly even coverage onto our yarn. But now we need to add some acid. I'm coming in with 500 milliliters of white vinegar, which is approximately 2 cups. And so now I'm also going to distribute this by sort of dipping and raising the yarn into the bucket. And to some extent, some of this color might start striking pretty quickly. Let's just do a quick check. Right now, we still see a lot of yellow in the liquid. I'm gonna check back in after a couple of hours to see how we're doing with the color absorption. It is so hot today that it's possible all the yellow will absorb in a couple of hours. And then we can go on and do the pink overnight. But I'm going to seal this bucket up and we'll check back in. It is later in the afternoon and our yarn is looking quite yellow, and taking a cup of water out, the water is looking very, very clear. So I'm now going to remove all of the yarn. from the dye bath so that way we can add the next color. Okay, and now we're coming in with our pink. That yellow is already looking incredibly saturated, which really isn't that bad for a 0.25% depth of shade. And our pink is looking pearlescent. That is something that we have seen before with, say, pink orchid. I don't know if I've noticed this here. Now, it could be about the acid concentration. It also could be some of the dye wasn't all the way dissolved. So let me try to give you a better look at that. I'm not sure if I can pick it up on camera, but it looks like that a pigment is just sort of suspended versus being dissolved. There we go. I think that that's showing up now. I don't know what it is about this. Hopefully this doesn't mean we're gonna have a bleeder after the fact, but let's try to add the yarn. And I don't suppose I mean try, I mean let's add the yarn. We do have some tonal variation in here. There are some lighter patches that are a little more butter yellow and then deeper patches of yellow. That comes from the crowding, and that's part of what will give this beautiful tonal effect on the yarn. Okay, I have a zip tie that's empty, and so I think some yarn fell in, so we're gonna go ahead and add the rest now. Hopefully it caught on camera when the yarn fell in, but I didn't hear a splash. So I'm not really sure what's happening, but I do want to try to move the yarn and sort of like change the direction everything is facing. I am seeing tonal variation already in here. I believe that since we have a lot of acid in here, the color will start to strike faster. And once it has set, ooh, look, you can see we've got some more reds and more orangey hues in here. It's actually really, really pretty. Goodness. I will try to remove that yarn that is in there. I do see it in the bucket now. I will remove that once we're done with this color. Now, I don't know if all of this will strike in a couple of hours like the other color. I mean, let's see. Actually, that's not looking very dark. So maybe we will revisit in just a couple of hours. And maybe we'll do the blue tonight, or maybe we'll wait until tomorrow. But anyway, let's just wait. It's the same day, a couple of hours later, and the water is warm and slightly pink, but significantly clear. The water is like on a nice bath type temperature. And so I'm considering, as I remove the yarn, to slip the zip tie just a tiny bit through the skeins, so that way a different part of the yarn will go into the dye bath. So as I lift and remove the yarn, I'm gonna just try to rotate the zip ties a quarter or so. Not very much, just trying to mix it up. This 1-to-1 ratio of the yellow and pink is actually really lovely. We have both like a beautiful orange and some nice red notes, because pink plus yellow gives us red, which is something that people with more color theory experience may not be as surprised by as I was when I first realized that. But anyway, I'm gonna finish removing this, and then I'm gonna try my best to rescue the skeins at the bottom. I still don't know why that zip tie failed, because I checked it and it holds. So I must have like grabbed on or put pressure against the little tab that is the release for the reusable zip ties. So I'm not entirely sure. We are gonna try our best. Okay, so I'm now reaching straight down and just pulling up on the yarn, squeezing out the water, and off camera I'm gonna go and try to untangle. Yep, these skeins are incredibly tangled. And I'm going to really need to work hard to untangle them once the yarn is dry. It'll be easier when the yarn is dry, but the good news is that they're DK weight, and so that should be a little bit easier to fix than the fingering weight. But anyway, let's go ahead and dye our third round of color. Oh, I'm still annoyed with myself that this has happened, but hopefully detangling won't be super hard. So I'm pouring in our Caribbean blue, And the good news is that it seems to have all dissolved. That is the good news. Well, it's not bad news, but this color can take longer to bind than some of the others, so we're gonna keep our fingers crossed through the whole process. And now let's add the yarn. Is this really gonna give us a teal? Oh, watch me doubt the process now. Oh goodness. Oh goodness, but yeah, we'll just see. Ooh, yeah. Oh, this is beautiful. This is beautiful in so many ways, in so many layers. Ooh, I'm like trying to very carefully open up and move things. Doing my best to open and move to really give this blue access everywhere as best I can. Yep, basically looking for little hints that feel super orange and making sure those get a good dunk on their own. Now we may still have some orange hints, but this teal looks amazing. I don't know how well you can really see it on camera right now, but it is a beautiful, beautiful color. And I am trying hard to not make a mess. Now, I have one tiny little snip of yarn left from the second stage. And so now I'm gonna let this sit overnight, and hopefully by morning, most of this color will be gone and we can go and heat set the yarn. Whew, the humidity is so bad the next morning that the lens completely fogged up. All right, so what I'm gonna do now is remove the yarn. I think there may be a hint of blue left, but I'm gonna put it while it's still draining into this pasta insert so we can steam set it. And part of the reason why I'm not draining a lot, I mean, I'm draining some, but not all the water at first, is that this will give us the water that we need in this pot, so that way we can steam it. I am definitely seeing some blue color in here though. Let's see. Good news is all these zip ties seem to still be holding. Okay, and now if I lift this up, yeah, there's a couple of inches water down there. It's okay if the bottom of this is saturated. I'm gonna put a lid on this and put it on the stove. Goodness, it's gonna need to heat up. So I want it to heat for at least 30 minutes, but I'll probably set a timer for an hour just because I know it's gonna take some time for it to get steamy with all of that stuff in there. And now I'm coming in with 100 grams of 20 gram mini skeins here. And you can see that we do have some color left. It's maybe a little bit overexposed, but it does look like a nice pastel blue. And I don't know if I'm gonna leave this in overnight or how long, but we're gonna leave this in to soak up the color. Now, yarn mops for this series for people who have Chanukah samplers may appear over multiple videos, so I'm not gonna just leave this as a tonal pastel, but we will revisit that later. But anyway, I'm gonna start going and heating this yarn. All right, it has been about an hour. Now, I do want to point out that we have a lot of blue color sort of beneath the pot. I'm not sure if you were able to see that, but that is present. So I'm now going to start removing the yarn so that way we can set it aside to cool. I mean, this colorway is absolutely beautiful. Beautiful. It did sort of exactly what I was hoping it would do. We just need to hope that we aren't going to see things bleed, but If they do, I have some ideas of ways that we can help mitigate that. But we do know that there was a fair amount of blue left in the water that we let sink down. So I'm not sure if that is more bleeding or anything like that. So I will slowly remove these. And so that way we can let them cool so we can wash them. Now that I've removed the yarn, we can see that bit of blue that was left behind. Some of this was just what was there already, and some may have come out in hot water, which is something that Caribbean blue does. In hot water, it does, and it can bleed. But that's true with a lot of acid dyes. So I'm not concerned yet. We're gonna let the yarn cool completely though. We're gonna start washing our yarn. And I think we're starting with some of the yarn that was on the bottom of the steamer basket. And so this is some of the yarn that was partially immersed in liquid. And the good news, the great news, is right off the bat, I'm seeing maybe a tiny hint of blue, but like a tiny, tiny hint. Now, where I'm gonna start holding my breath and crossing my fingers is when I add a little bit of soap to this, and I'm going to let the basin fill up now. Alright, and let's see. Alright, that is looking the same, but we're going to move it through and see if the blue gets deeper. If it's not getting deeper, then, and it's not, that is great. A little bit of blue, totally fine. Totally fine. So I'm going to go ahead and wash this a few times and then I'll check back in. I added 2 tablespoons of white vinegar to a rinse. And when I lifted the yarn out, there was no bleeding. And now when I remove the yarn, I'm not seeing bleeding either. And this is 1 rinse past that. So I'm going to go ahead and do 1 more. I'm not sure what it is about Caribbean blue. One thing I found can help in the past if there's bad bleeding, which we didn't have here even before I helped it resolve. But one thing that with some bright blues that have helped is if you take a pot full of water, heat it up, water and vinegar, heat it up, let the color bleed out in the hot, nearly boiling water, and then remove the yarn from the dye bath before letting it cool off completely. That is something that does work pretty well. And so if you're having issues, that's something I recommend. But I'm now gonna go put my yarn through the spin dryer and hang it up to dry. And here is the yarn that we got from those 3 layers of color. No, we are not just on a tonal teal that maybe we would have achieved had we just mixed our primary colors together in those ratios. Instead, we have a tonal with multiple hues in it. I see, in addition to the greens, we have purples and reds and blues, and it is just beautiful. There is going to be variation skein to skein based on the placement as we are adding the yarn into the bucket. But I absolutely love this kind of saturated, variegated yarn. I mean, variegated, it really is a tonal. Like, these are subtle shifts in tone, but there are differences in color. So I don't know, would you call it tonal? Would you call it variegated? What would you call it? Please let me know in the comments below. Now we do have our yarn mop here, which is probably a little bit hard to see like how blue it is against the backdrop. But compared to bare yarn, there wasn't a lot of blue left in that container. And I plan to use this as a yarn mop in one of the other videos for this Chanukah special. I just don't know if this would have made an appearance earlier or later in the series because at the time of filming, I don't know the order of the videos yet. But make sure you go and check out the 2022 ChemKnits Chanukah playlist so you can check out all of the videos and see if you have missed any. But every night at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time, there will be a new video so you can join and see what will be coming in the next nights of Chanukah. The last thing that I need to deal with is this tangled mess. We should have 10 gram DK weight skeins in here. And they may need to be reskeined, but there's also a chance that I will be able to reorder them. I have a feeling I will be rescanning them, but what I can do now that it's dry is look for the ties and attempt to orient the yarn in the right way. It's just some of them, like this one, might be tangled enough that it's worth me rescanning it. But there may be some like this one that are completely salvageable. I can look and see at the tie and everything is going in the right direction. But if I'm seeing a lot of pulls or a mess like this, I will reskein it because I don't want anyone to end up with tangled minis. Twisted up, I have arranged these mini skeins in no particular order. And there are absolutely some differences in here. We have some that really show the blue more, some with hints of almost an orange brown, and others that lean more purple. And then there's some that have a little bit of all of those colors. All of this is very, very beautiful and just some of the tonal variation that we got from this technique because we layered on 3 different colors. Since these were mini skeins, we probably could create some kind of really fun fade out of these skeins, taking advantage of those subtle differences to create differences in color. However, if we had been dyeing full skeins of yarn, that doesn't mean they would have been asymmetric. Within each bundle of 100 grams, there was a lot of consistency in the colorways we had within that individual bundle. So I believe that doing this kind of technique, if I had 13 or 14 full skeins of yarn in a bucket, there would be differences within the dye lot of individual skeins, but each individual skein would have a beautiful consistency to it. I almost forgot to show you this. This is a little snip of yarn that came after the second round, after the pink. And so it's fun that you can see some of those like orange, really peachy tones still in the yarn in places. But it's also really fun to see what that layer of blue did to create our colorway. And what a rich colorway it is. For a little bit of bonus fun, I decided to mix the 3 primary colors together in the same proportions of 2 parts blue, 1 part pink, 1 part yellow to dye a tonal yarn without doing the multiple layers. I started with 24 cups of water and I measured out 100 milliliters of the blue, 50 milliliters of each of the pink and yellow, and then added 200 grams of yarn that had pre-soaked for over 30 minutes. I stirred things around until everything was well covered. Then I added some vinegar and went to heat the yarn for 30 minutes to soak up this color. The dye stocks I'm using are a little bit older, so the final color may not be perfect, but I still thought that this would be fun to compare to our lovely, more rainbow tonal. Here is the beautiful saturated tealish green that you get when you mix all 3 primary colors at the proportions that we used in this video, but we dyed it all at once versus dyeing it in layers. Dyeing the yarn in layers gave this gorgeous rainbow effect. Some of them end up being a little bit more purple. Some have more of that green in there as well. But because the colors did not bind to the yarn evenly, we see a lot more of a rainbow than we do if we follow the technique that we used, just did it all in one step. Holy cow, my mini skein feels so tiny right now, but I absolutely adore how this color turned out. And I really need to play around more with doing the videos comparing and contrasting dyeing yarn all at once with all the colors mixed together versus dyeing it in layers, because I love the way that that layered softness look is on yarn. Now, if you had ordered one of the ChemKnits Chanukah yarn samplers where you have a wrapped package to open up every night, you may have noticed that tonight's was wrapped in a little dreidel, which is awesome. And there is a little one label that matches the rest of the nights that's down at the bottom of your box, just in case you want to use a twist tie or something to attach it to your mini skein. And don't forget that there are organza wrapped packages in there that are bonus 20-gram minis that can be from any of the nights, 1 through technically 9. So double check the date on that because some of you will have an extra mini to open up tonight. This Chanukah special is one of my favorite series to create here on YouTube because one of the most frequent questions that I get asked is, I wonder how that might knit up. And so then if you have this sampler, which will feature 8 different dyeing techniques over the 8 nights, 8 different types of colorways, you can swatch and play with these types of colors to see what kind of colorways you like, the way they work up the best. So then you both understand what types of hand-dyed yarn you might want to buy, but also what types of hand-dyed yarn you might want to dye yourself. And so please tag me on Instagram and share the things that you make from Chanukah. I love seeing all of your creations. Please subscribe and turn on notifications so that way you don't miss any videos, because the whole series is a lot of fun, and I am going to be in the live premiere chat room some of the nights to react to the videos and answer questions, and so you can hang out with me and chat with me. But now, the most important question. What do you think will be coming up in night 2? There isn't a theme or pattern this year to tie things together specifically, so I'm not teasing for you to try to figure that out, but I look forward to hearing both your color and technique guesses every night as we get ready for tomorrow. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and thank you so much for watching. Happy Chanukah!